Welcome back. I'm pleased to be the moderator of this panel on return on investment, ROI for short. ROI on a career not only consists of pay and benefits, but it also includes working conditions, job security, opportunities for advancement, and anticipated longevity in a career. These factors should be considered by any individual contemplating a career as an airline pilot. During this panel, several experts will share their perspectives on ROI for an airline pilot profession and what it means for airlines looking to hire new pilots. Our first speaker is Dr. Ken Burns, chairman of the flight department at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, Daytona Beach. Dr. Burns is going to share some research on the subject of pilot compensation as it relates to pilot hiring patterns. Alex Marin, Chief Operating Officer of ExpressJet Airlines, will also join us. Ms. Marin was asked to join on very short notice when our speaker from United, Mike McCaskey, had to withdraw due to unforeseen circumstances. We certainly appreciate the effort that she has made to be here. Alex will provide for us an overview of what ExpressJet is doing to attract pilots to the company and encourage more young people to become airline pilots. Janelle Kilgore is the Director of Student Financial Aid at the University of North Dakota. She'll brief us on current dynamics related to financing college students' tuition and flight training. And lastly, Captain Bill Couette, First Vice President of Administration Secretary of the Airline Pilots Association, and Bill will provide ALPA's view on this subject for us. So we'll go ahead and turn the floor over to Dr. Ken Burns to present us with his research study.
Very good. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, ALPA, for inviting me to this event. I've been to a few pilot shortage summits now, and the first one that I attended, it was kind of clear to me there was a lot of research that needed to be done as to why people are choosing not to join this profession. And personally myself, my career aspirations as far back as I can remember was to join this industry and to be an airline pilot. And when I graduated the university and began work as a flight instructor, having a family at the time as well, it clearly became a change where it was no longer an option for me because of the lifestyle and because of the pay. So my question was, how many pilots out there can be in the industry but choose not to be in the industry because of barriers such that I went through? So did a bit of a survey on that, but first talk about some of the data. Bring the slides up here. We've talked about demand already. This is Mike McGee from RAND Corporation, did a great study. He recently put out, and he really looked at the entire industry, including military, 135, 91, even down to the commercial flight instructor level. Did a great job on it. The red line is his projected retirements at majors, and this includes cargo, major cargo as well, up until 2028. And you can see a significant amount. We're spiking almost 3,000 folks a year. There are some retirements from the regionals, but of course there's less at that level. It's more of a younger generation that moves on to the majors. So this is one thing that creates demand. We know Boeing and Airbus and everybody else has put out these numbers. I think Boeing's numbers are here to 88,000 new pilots by 2032. And we can argue these numbers, but it's clear that there's a need, there's a demand, and it's because of increased growth of travel. There's billions of people on this planet, and they want to get from A to B, so we're going to continue to grow, but it's also due to this increase in retirements as well as competing industries. So one thing that I notice at the university is no longer are all of my graduates going airline or going just to fly an airplane. I'm losing some to unmanned systems. So they'll graduate after a few years, and then they'll be a contractor for a few years, General Dynamics or whoever, flying these unmanned systems. So competing industries, along with now worldwide, for years, U.S. was really we had the market for air transportation. But with the growth worldwide, the options are greater for our students now. So all of these things, I think it's the perfect storm. We have a need for pilots in the airline industry, there's no doubt about it. Looking at the predicted pilot demand, again, this is from Dr. McGee's study, and you guys know this, the majors hire from the regionals. The green line there is the ones that are coming from the regionals, small cargo, is included in that number to the majors, and the red line is the military. These are projected out to 2028. So the majors, they have a farm team, and they draw from the regionals, of course. And we heard some numbers earlier that the majors now about 65,000 to 70,000 pilots employed within the major airlines. When you look at the small cargo, along with the regional airlines, along with the 135s, you're looking at about 22,000 people. The regional airlines, or the major airlines, are going to have to replace about 5% a year. Okay, 5% of the pilots a year as we go forward here. What does that number do if they're pulling from the regionals? Well, if they pull that number from the regionals, that's 15 to 20% of the regional population a year that they're pulling to the majors. And like I said before, where are the regionals getting their pilots? Well, they're getting them from us who need flight instructors, right? So the vacuum is on, and our turnover is more like 70%. So you got 5%, 15 to 20, 70% down at our level. So there is a strong demand going up. And pilots now have options. So, you know, it used to be an airline would come to campus and wave the keys to a shiny jet, and I would have 47 people jump. Okay, now our pilots are making better educated decisions. They're looking at things such as pay, lifestyle, domicile, you know, what's my life going to be like, which airline has the best option. So it's definitely a pilot's market now. And we're seeing the entire market changing as far as the power, I guess you could say, that the pilots have within it. A little bit on the reduction of supply. This slide's a bit dated. It only goes up to 2011, but it gives you an idea of what our actual yield is for students coming to the university. So of those students we accepted, so, and I'm talking 1,500 to 1,700 a year, okay, and we get 2,300 applications maybe. But of those ones that we actually accept, this is the number by year that has actually showed up to campus. And you can see it's gone from 45-ish% down into the mid to lower 30s there. So that's our yield on students joining this career field. A lot of this has to do with return on investment. So our students are a different generation, which we just learned about. And they want to know the details, but not only do they want to know the details, their parents are a lot more informed, and their parents are the ones that are really advising them and really making the decisions. I've had hundreds of conversations of students coming to Embry-Riddle to study business or to study some other field, and the parents and students sit down with me, well, he really wants to fly and be a pilot, but we don't think that that's a rewarding career, so he's going to do business and fly on the side. What happens is we don't give them that education, that 1,300 to 1,400 hours aviation intensive education beyond the FAA minimums. Okay, so we're not preparing those types of folks as well for the industry. And there's less of them coming in. Now this, you know, it's not all doom and gloom. This, if I extend this out, it's on the increase. It's increased about 4% the past 2 years, so about 8% higher than that. So we're coming back, okay, and a lot of this has to do with money. If you look at the timing there, you know, when the financial market kind of went bust, so did this, you know, because of that return on investment discussion. So a large number of students, they never start training due to this perceived low return on investment. Approximately 65%, and I stood up and said these numbers before, make it through the program. You know, this is just normal when we talk to our counterparts and our peer organizations. This is where everybody is basically at. Students come, they have a passion for aviation. When I survey our students recently in a professionalism study we did, and we asked them, when did you first know you wanted to be a pilot? Over half of them said before elementary school. Okay, so very, very passionate, very, very motivated group of individuals that shows up at our organization. And a lot of times the passion is still there, but it's expensive. Flight training is expensive. So the number one cause of dropouts, or so the students will tell you their number one reason for dropping out is because of the money factor. You know, it's expensive to flight train. Buying this equipment, providing these services is expensive. If you look at the cost of a single engine non-complex airplane, it's increased over 300% in the last 10 years. And it's the same airplane it was 10 years ago, maybe even less complex and cheaper to produce. So, you know, that cost has to be passed on. When you look at the PTS, when most of us did our flight training, it was a little book. Now we have the ACS coming out. These books get bigger, the requirements get bigger, the system is bigger, there's more delays. Sometimes I have students wait over a half hour for takeoff before they get off the ground to start their training. So there's a lot of things adding to this cost of training. And our numbers, there was a study done by UND, Kent Lovelace and Higgins, and some others here, did a study, and they found that 35% of their current students were rethinking whether or not they wanted to join the airline career field. Those numbers are common for us too. So they graduate, and some of them say even, well, I'll get a job at a regional, get some turbine time, so that I can go into the corporate world where I really want to be. Okay, so there's a lot of different dynamics going on. Looking at, this is a slide I used during our open house when I'm talking to parents. This is a study we did a few years ago, and it compares the lifetime pay of an airline pilot versus an aeronautical engineer. And it follows the path. You can see the blue there. The engineer starts at a higher salary, and they get their normal increases every year or whatever, 5%, whatever it is. The airline pilot, by the way, this includes flight instruction for the first 2 years there. And you can see on year 3, it goes down, okay? So this data, by the way, is 2.5 years old, so it's not current. But you can see it dips there, and then they get a job at a regional, and they come up. They spend some time in the majors, and then in the regionals, and then they take a job in the majors, and they take a dip in pay again. And it's kind of exponential from there if you follow their progression, as long as they're getting normal upgrades and the such. So this looks really good, and what we tell students is, yeah, you got to earn your keep in this industry. The pay is not what it should be. There's not much we can do about that. Becky said that earlier. But look at the end of it. Okay, if you come to an Embry-Riddle or a UND or somewhere else and you're able to get to the industry at 1,000 hours instead of 1,500, that's a year of your life of flying. So what does that year of life, that extra year in the industry get you? Look at the end of it, year 27. It gets you more like 200K. Okay, so that's kind of the return on investment. These are the kind of discussions we have. We're very upfront with all our students. This is expensive. It's going to cost a lot of money to get into, and the immediate reward isn't there. Okay, it's going to take some time for that to happen. And this looks good, but when you put your business hat on and you take into account the time value of money, we all know as time goes on, our dollar is worth less, right? So if we take a look at that, under normal circumstances here, it looks like it takes about 15 years before the pilot's making more than the engineer. But if you take into account the time value of money, you can see it's a bit longer. Okay, when we look at this totally, when we look at the total earnings, the pilot will catch up to the engineer in year 27. Okay, and this is due to the fact that at the very beginning of their career, when their dollar was worth more, right, they weren't getting that dollar. The engineer was. They're getting more dollars on the back end, but their dollar is worth less at that point, if that makes sense. So. Okay, so this slide that's up here right now, this is the study that I started with. So, the question in my mind was, we got to survey the pilots, the current population. We got to reach out to those that aren't in the airline industry and figure out what they're doing. So we sent out 35,000 postcards nationwide, took a random sample to try and get people to take a survey online. We had to send postcards because there was no way to collect their email addresses through the FAA. We had to use the FAA database. So we actually sent postcards, and we had about 2,000 folks respond, of which about 1,800 of those were usable data. And this is a quick summary of the results here. First, we asked, okay, so you're a pilot, you're an ATP or a commercial pilot. Is flying your primary occupation? And 30% said no, 70% said yes. So right off the bat, we know, by the way, this is only people under age 65 with an ATP or commercial certificate. So right away, we know that 30% of the population out there, of the 242,000 plus pilots that are eligible to work in the airline industry, this means that 72,000 of them don't even fly for a living. Okay, and that's me and some other folks in the room. Now, you may not want to fly your airplane because we've been out of it so long. Okay, but this is the fact. We all know lots of people who have ATPs that are never going to use them for anything in the commercial realm. So only 70% of the population actually flies for a living. We asked, okay, so what statement best describes you? Of the sample, 55% said they don't intend to be an airline pilot. So these are current pilots, ATPs and commercials, that don't intend to be an airline pilot. So the way the data statistics works is the amount of data we have, we can say that this is generalizable to the entire public at 99% confidence, plus or minus 3%. So that tells us that 55.2% means that there's 130 to 138,000 pilots out there that don't intend to work as airline pilots. Again, they already have an ATP or a commercial. These are not people who want to be pilots. These are the current population of pilots. Some of them plan, 12.5% did plan to seek airline employment. They're building their minimums. 3% plan to go international, the rest were already employed in the industry, about 30%. When asked directly, is pay an issue that's kept you from joining the airline workforce, 82% said yes, absolutely yes. So just what Becky was showing earlier. Also asking questions about lifestyle, the same thing, well, a little bit less. 52% said it was a concern, it was an issue for them. Then said, okay, what would motivate you to join the workforce? So we put out 8 different questions that were randomly within the survey. So it will pop up and just say, hey, would you leave your current job for $20,000 to $25,000 a year? Yes or no? And then a few questions later, hey, would you leave your current job for $35,000 to $40,000 a year? Yes or no? So we asked these questions individually because if you ever listed out, would you leave your job for 30, 40, 50, 60, where are they going to check? 60, okay? So we wanted a true representation. And this was the results of the data. So you can see between 25 and 30K, only about 1.2% of them said that they would actually leave their current job. This was only the people from the sample that clicked that they didn't want to join the airline, by the way. So we only use the people that said, I don't want to go to the airlines. But you can see how that goes up, okay? So the sweet spot may be somewhere around 40, Endeavor comes to mind with that. 18% of the population says, okay, yes, I'll change my mind. I will apply for an airline. Whether or not they make it through training is another story, right? And that equates, if we generalize that to the population, to almost 25,000 pilots. So, this question of pilot shortage, pay shortage, I don't have the answer, but the data, it's at least on the survey, the people are saying, I will show up if you pay me. Okay, I will take that challenge, I will take that job. I will join that industry if you pay me. Airlines' response thus far to what we're having for this shortage, we've had bridge programs for a long time, but they come and go. There's been airlines I've never even heard of before. I got a call from Hawaii the other day, a small operation that I never knew even existed. But everybody wants to set up a bridge program. Everybody wants access to students, and they're getting smarter about how they're doing it. So rather than just simple hire agreements, they're doing more things like the Cape Air JetBlue program, which is like the gold standard, okay, for motivating people and giving a pathway that we've already talked about here today. So in your sophomore year, you're interviewed by JetBlue and Cape Air. And if you're good and they accept you, then they're going to mentor you while you're in college. Okay, they're going to call you, they're going to talk to you, they're going to follow you, you're going to go to them in the summer and do internships, then you're going to graduate and work as a flight instructor for a year, then you're going to go to Cape Air and fly 302s, hard IFR in the winter, okay, and then you're going to move on to JetBlue, and we've had people go all the way through that pipeline program. Because it's a clear path, when we show potential students these options, mom and dad now see, instead of, okay, I spend all this money and he might get a job, or I spend all this money and wow, look at this opportunity, okay? So that has set off a whole bunch of these type of programs starting to come in. Airlines wanting to set up the bridge type programs, the pilot pipeline programs, Envoy where they're hiring flight instructors and then offering them back to schools and keeping them employed. We're seeing a lot of new hire bonuses, but honestly our students, when I talk to them, our instructors I should say, as they're leaving, I'm asking them, why didn't you go here? Because of the money. And it's like, well, the 1 year is good. Okay, but the 1 year is 1 year, and then I'm going to take a pay cut, and I'm going to be in New York, and I have no family that lives there that I can move in with, and I'm going to have student loans, and so they're strategically thinking, why, yeah, that money looks really good. I can't do it. It's not going to work. Okay, that's one of the reasons why the Endeavor has worked out so well, because it's more over time. Annual bonuses, scholarships for flight training. We've started to see some of this where a couple airlines have showed up and said, well, what if we pay for the CFI or the ATP CTP for the student? Would they give us 2 years, 3 years commitment on the back end? Okay, we don't have anything yet. Okay, but those are the kind of discussions that we're having with some airlines, and that's important because we need flight instructors. And like I said, our turnover is 70%. There's 100,000 flight instructors in this country. Only 12% of them actively teach. And those 12%, most of them are the low-time pilots that are building their time to move on into this career. So we need those people. Of the 150 to 200 that we graduate on an annual basis, only 70% go for their CFI. When we ask them why, they just can't afford it at that point. Okay, so if they can get an injection of money from somebody, they would probably sign a commitment to that because it would stimulate their opportunity to build their time and to go out and grow. So, and then of course any flow through or preferred hiring agreements with a major airline. Again, this is that whole picture. Show it to the students from an early age, and they can see the pathway. Sell it to them and their parents, and they have the passion. There's tons of people out there that have the passion for this industry. They're just having trouble seeing the immediate return on investment. So with that,
Great.
Sums it up.
Thank you, Ken. That's an excellent look at the data of motivations for students pursuing this career. I'm sure we'll have some great questions from that. Janelle, if you'd like to walk us through, as Ken brought up some of the concerns of students and their parents about the cost of flight training, how does financing work into that?
Yeah, thanks, Ken. That was really a great lead-in. And thank you for inviting financial aid to the table, because this is a really important topic. It's very near and dear to my heart because I sat across the desk or across the phone line from many students for about 6 years, and so it does get to be challenging. It does get to be a lot of financial stress for both the student as well as the family. There are good days and there are bad days. So when we're trying to talk about how do we recruit these students into these programs, once they get to college, I'm sorry, but there's not many options as far as federal financial aid that we can provide to you to help cover the entire cost. We can get you some funding, but to cover the entire cost. So there has to be some different conversations that have to enter the table. And I think really at the beginning stages, when we're talking about recruitment and things like that, is we really need to have a family conversation. Really talking to also the parents, maybe it's a sibling, brother, grandma, grandpa. There's all sorts of people that are involved in that family conversation to really talk about the financial component to help really understand the costs that will incur. So at the University of North Dakota, an in-state student, so a North Dakota resident, for 1 year, just their main cost for tuition and fees, room and board, and books and supplies is going to run about $16,500 for the year. That's not including any of their flight training. For the 4 years, which includes all of their flight training, they're looking at about $131,000 for their 4-year degree. And that's for the students that have the high commitment, the high passion, that are completing the courses, they're ready for their instructor lessons and things like that, and they're getting the job done. If they're a non-state or out-of-state resident or not Minnesota or some of the special agreement states that we have, their flight training program goes up to $175,000. So talking to a family about those costs gets to be a little bit challenging on our side of the house in the financial aid community to say, you can get federal financial aid up to X dollar amounts, but then there's other options. There's other commitments that potentially need to happen on behalf of the family. And so that gets to be exciting conversations. Unfortunately, I have had to work and deal with a lot of tears and a lot of upset families that their student has been wanting to be a pilot or wanted to fly since they were 3 or 4 years old. And so they've had this anticipation that they're going to come to college and they're going to be a pilot, and then some of these numbers really come into reality, and so that gets to be a little bit challenging to kind of work through. For us, we've had the flight education program for a significant amount of time. The FAA approval, so we're a Part 141 school, so we are able to work with federal financial aid to do as much as we can for our student population. Vets benefits, when I was working specifically with the students, the vets benefits weren't paying for the flight fees. Now they are paying for the flight fees, but there's a little review kind of happening within that area, and so that's been a significant partner to kind of continue to help students get through these different programs. In May 2015, so our most recent grads, we just pulled the data on that, and our average student loan debt is about $80,000. So $26,000 roughly is federal, and around $65,000 is private loans. And so our average student that is not an aviation student is graduating with about $19,400. And so that's a pretty significant increase that the aviation population is having to incur on additional debt because of their higher cost programs. Training and things like that are definitely par none. They have the top technologies and things like that, but it is a significant commitment that way. Just to kind of put that into perspective, so our students with that $80,000 student loan debt will roughly have to pay, and I just did roughly 5% of interest that they may pay, will roughly have to pay about $848 a month just for their student loan payments. And so when they're coming out and not making a very high salary, that's a very significant commitment. We may see them have to live at home. We may have to see them pick up additional jobs. We may look at a lot of different options. Federal financial aid, with those student loans, they have some financial hardship programs where they may be able to put their loans into forbearance. But for the most part, their private loans and things like that, they're going to have to make those commitments to pay. And there's not as many flexibilities on that side of the house. And so in 2012, there's a financial company called Int'l that works within the student financial aid world, and financial stress has surpassed the academic stress. And so when you have students that are dealing with stress financially, it's going to pull them out of their academic mindset. It's going to take them away from their studies. Maybe you're distracting them while they're in the aircraft. Can I actually afford to be in here, or can I not afford to be in here? And so that's a really big conversation that I think needs to be had for the most part. Students are, taking out higher loans. The nice part right now is that the prime interest rate has been low. In about 2007, 2008, thereabouts time frame, I had students sitting across from me that were taking out student loans at 12, 13% interest. Now, they potentially could go as low as 2 to 3, but I have still seen as high as 8 or 9, just depending on the financial strength of the student as well as their co-signer. So if you're not familiar with the private student loan industry, a student can take out student loans up to their educational cost. Specifically, we work with students semester by semester within our aviation program because we cannot include flight fees that they've not registered for a specific course. So in some cases, every semester they're applying for additional loans to help pay for their educational expenses. So every semester, the student, as well as whoever they have as a co-signer does not necessarily have to be mom and dad. It can be grandma, grandpa, brother, sibling, family, friend, somebody willing to help them through their educational path. So there's a potential credit hit every semester. So every 4 or 5 months, they're having their credit hit again, which can also continue to bring down that credit rating. So students have some challenges that way. They don't have necessarily an open line of credit, so they apply for a student loan potentially their first year, and they know that their program is going to cost them $131,000. They don't have this open line of credit where they can kind of draw from and pull from. It's really kind of an application every semester. So that gets to be a little bit challenging after a certain amount of time. You know, potentially the cosigner, if they're looking at purchasing a house, if they're looking at purchasing a car or things like that, maybe they have other children that are in school. Those gets to be a little bit more challenging. I've had students and families sit across from me where they have had students go through medical school or other higher cost educational programs, and their credit is maxed out. They don't have any opportunity to take out or co-sign an additional loan for their students, and so they may have to look at, you know, some other resources or family friends that may be willing to assist them in that path. UND has a large scholarship population, and so we're really excited about that. And the aviation program has really continued to commit their growth in that. And so the minimum scholarship that they have right now is $2,500 for the year, up to $10,000. So on a yearly basis, they give over $370,000 in student scholarships. So that's a significant break financially for the students. But again, a lot of it is going to be for students that have continued to grow and shown that dedication and shown that passion and commitment. And so, you know, there's lots of different things when you talk about financial aid that really can kind of factor into all these things. So we've seen some tears, we've seen some yelling, we've seen some confusion. You know, the process is not as easy as some would like. What are some real solutions, which is why I'm really excited to be kind of at the table, at the panel today, but continuing to grow scholarships. So one example that I can bring is that the state of North Dakota, prior to oil boom, we were seeing a decline, and we were seeing a decline in our medical field. And so the University of North Dakota also has a medical school, and our North Dakota government saw that as a need to get medical providers to practice in rural North Dakota, which is not as attractive, but if you like a little bit more laid-back lifestyle, it's very appealing. And so what has happened is that we've created a scholarship program where a student going through medical school who's committed for 5 years after they're done with their medical residencies and things like that, they can get $100,000 in scholarships. Basically, will wipe out all of their tuition for the 4 years while they're in medical school. And so that's a huge commitment. We're continuing to see that program grow. And so those are potentially some opportunities too, where the industry can kind of start talking in some of those types of language as well. We work with a lot of contract areas, and so right now we have the Chinese, Japanese, and different pilot programs that we contract students. And so the aviation department has seen a 90% completion rate, where our domestics is a little bit closer to 70, or within that 65 to 70%. And so students that know that they have money are more dedicated to their studies. You know, they're not worried about the financial aspects of how and where they're getting their money at, and are able to make that commitment to their program. There are different student loan forgiveness programs that probably would be most appealing to this industry. Right now, the Peace Corps has where a student can get up to 15% of their student loans forgiven for the year, up to 70% of their total student loan debt. Military, they have different programs within their organization as well. Teachers can get up to $17,500 in student loan debt forgiven based on where they're teaching and serving and things like that. There's right now the Federal Public Service Forgiveness Program, where after 10 years a student can have, or a former student I guess, could have, you know, the remaining debt as long as they've made 120 on-time payments and things like that. So there's a lot of different opportunities and ways to grow that way. If the loan forgiveness program is tied to service, it is almost more like a tax-free payment for the student, where the student can have that forgiven. Right now, a lot of the private educational programs don't really have those loan forgiveness programs. A lot more of it is tied to the federal programs, where, as I said before, our recent grads had $26,000 in federal student loan debt and $65,000 in private education debt. And so really trying to find that balance and trying to create some new opportunities that way. I think the timing of this conversation is really, really important because right now the federal financial aid system is up for reauthorization. And so if you have connections with Congress and different legislatures, I think it's important for you to start that conversation. Undergraduate aviation students are typically undergraduate students, and they're only eligible for the max an undergraduate student is that if they were in liberal arts or communications or business, even though they have these higher cost expenses, their aid doesn't necessarily go up. They may have more subsidized loan versus their unsubsidized loan where the government pays interest for them. And so talking about the higher cost programs and really trying to create opportunities for these students and for financial aid community to really potentially either increase the federal aid program to this particular population would be really attractive and would continue to help grow opportunities for those students as well as low need students or low income families. You know, they don't have as many resources as maybe our middle income to higher income families, and so this is a huge population that we have also had to kind of turn away in a sense because they don't really have many opportunities for those co-signers or for a parent to take out a Parent Plus loan and things like that. Our National Financial Aid Association has a CEO, and his name is Justin Drager, and he has done a lot of great things for the financial aid industry. And so he may be a potential person to continue to reach out to or get connected to talk about, you know, the increased opportunity and the increased demand and need of financial aid for this population. So
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that, Janelle. That's very insightful information for us. Ken led us in with the motivations for students and some of the thought process on pursuing a career. You present us with some of the financial impact and challenges there. Alex, can you bring to us the perspective of management from an airline point of view and what specifically regional airlines and the industry as a whole can do to not only motivate more students to enter in the profession, but to address some of the concerns, and how are you doing that, and how do you see the industry moving forward from here to address that issue?
Well, thanks, Paul, for inviting me here. I think this is an incredibly important dialogue for all of us because it really speaks to opportunities and how do we capitalize on all of the different stakeholders that we have here to really address, you know, what's at the tip of the iceberg, but certainly a growing concern and challenge. And I can speak certainly from the regional perspective that we definitely are seeing a pilot shortage. If you define the pilot shortage as more and more challenges in terms of attracting and hiring talent into the profession. You know, when I started in aviation, you know, back in we called it the glamour days, I guess, in the 70s and 80s. If we had anybody in the room that started, you know, back in those days, and you know, in those days, people came into aviation. It was the buzz. It was the place to go to. It was fascinating. It was growing. It was exciting. And I thought about Nicolette's elevator speech, right? We connect the world. And that's what we did in aviation and transportation. And we had a lot of people that were joining you know, our industry at that time. Now it's a little bit more, you know, my 24 nieces and nephews are more about the high tech, and social media is connecting the world, and people don't necessarily think about or have quite the same look and view, I think, of the aviation industry. And to be fair, you know, in the world there's been a lot of changes that have taken place in the last, you know, 10 or 15 years has been tough in many parts of aviation. But you know, when you look at it, and the statistic is, you know, I don't know. Certainly in our world, we're sort of past the discussion of whether or not there is a pilot shortage, and the statistic that most often stands out, I'm sure it was talked about earlier today, is, you know, that 18,000 number of, you know, as people are retiring, and you know, that's pretty much about how many pilots we have total in the regional world. We have about 1,600 regional aircraft currently flying today. You know, I was looking at a slide from a couple of years ago from the FAA and Boeing and others that was projecting that number to stay relatively flat. You know, I'd have to question that now, kind of seeing what's taking place and whether or not that 1,600 over the next 2, 5, 10 years, is it going to stay at 1,600, or is it going to actually gets smaller than that, and how that plays out, whether that number is 1,500, 1,400, or 800 is going to depend on some of the creative solutions that Janelle and Dr. Ken talked about, and all of us really coming to the table to really re-energize and almost a call to action on how do we accelerate and how do we bring people into the profession and help address some of the issues that my colleagues up here raised. And it is missed opportunities is what it is, because some of this will occur on the fringes, and there'll be some number of less flights. We already have over 108 communities here in the U.S. that have 10% actual flying. Some up gauges, so not necessarily reduction of seats, but certainly reduction of flights. I mean, this is in an environment, certainly with low fuel prices, where you'd actually be seeing the opposite if it weren't for sort of our somewhat of the constraint that we have now and how many pilots do we have in the pipeline. And the major carriers are asking us, how much can you fly for us? And you've probably seen some of the news reports that say, certain carriers, kind of postponing, the number of flights that they can handle for our major partners, until they can get their classes filled and people through the training. So we are definitely seeing the impact of some of the things we've talked about. And we have a whole host of things that we're doing in terms of self-help. I think all the things that you had up on your slide, Dr. Ken, and then some, looking at, everything from, I think, the market conditions over time, are going to evolve in terms of the salaries and first-year pay. I think the schooling is sort of a little different factor probably than it was back in the 70s and 80s. So, how do we work with the schools? There's different creative efforts going on as far as tuition reimbursement, capturing that pool of people who are in the instructor part of the pipeline and building that connection with them to encourage them to come and join the airline. Certainly in the regional space, we're very proud of the fact that we bring people in and they get the years of experience, and almost 70% plus of our pilots go to the major airlines. And but I think the understanding and the education, that this isn't just a small community issue, it isn't just a regional airline issue, it isn't just a major. It's really missed opportunities, for us in the U.S. To generate, a lot more jobs and generate more air service, and be able to have, a healthy, growing U.S. Aviation world out there. So it's been very impactful. The tuition reimbursements, working with all the associations through some of the first year pay and overall salaries, working with the major partners on that, because we have, the mutual, symbiotic relationships with them in terms of the compensation piece. We have our own internal, significantly beefed up our recruiting efforts, and nobody does it best than our own pilots, frankly, and our pilots that go on to the majors. We have ambassador programs. We have over 70 of our pilots that actually help us in our recruiting efforts to really try to talk about aviation and what it's like to, fly in the cockpit and be part of our world. But it's just going to take a lot of collective, and it's a matter of time whether or not it sort of plays out over the next 10 years, or having these types of dialogues, I think, are incredibly valuable to build the connections and the understandings, across the industry and across the academic institutions in terms of how do we attract people into aviation and how do we make it a long-term fulfilling career for them. And I don't think people fully understand sort of the full breadth of it, because the getting in factor has become so challenging, and not just certainly in our profession, but in other professions as well. It's interesting to see after World War II, the GI Bills were able to really fund education for huge masses of people, and how much that helped the economy and how much that helped the U.S. and, challenging some of our folks in the government affairs world to say, how do we have that dialogue on a broader scale, with government, with the associations, and with us as regional airlines working with our major partners. I see it as great opportunities, if we can really tackle this with some creative solutions. It's only upside. if we get people more interested in wanting to be part of our profession, and rather than let sort of the market forces dictate, really take some action and work towards some solutions. So thanks for having me, Paul.
Thank you, Alex. The call to action is I think, a theme that everybody can feel the sense of urgency in that. I appreciate your remarks. Thank you. And now Captain Couette, who is our Vice President of Administration and an Envoy pilot, and can bring the perspective of an airline pilot to these three commentaries about the return on investment from the perspective of someone who has been doing this for a very long time. Captain Couette.
Thank you, Paul. And on behalf of the association and one of the national officers, thank all of you today for joining us. This is great to see this kind of a turnout and see people that are willing to get involved, want to listen, and want to share their views. So this is great. For Ken, Janelle, Alex, thank you so much for your comments. I think that a lot of what you said was spot on today, and it's certainly something that we take up on our different committees at different levels in the union, because of course we have a concern as well. We represent 31 carriers across North America, over 52,000 pilots. And it just so happens that 14,000 of those pilots are regional pilots, or in our fee for departure carrier world. So we watch this very carefully. And as I listened to the other three panelists today talk, and as Paul said, I am an Envoy pilot. I've been there for 27 years, but when I started my career on March 1st, 1989, it was Simmons Airlines, and it was 360 pilots in a Shorts 360 that did not have a glass cockpit and never had an autopilot. So what this does today, what this has done today is kind of gives me some insight to share a story, and for those in the room that know me, I share stories. And so I've been a pilot for 34 years, 27 of those as a commercial airline pilot. I've seen a lot of changes go on in this industry. I have my views of what I think needs to be done to make this profession a romance again, because it was when I started in this career. But just to kind of compare everything as we go through this, graduate from St. Cloud State University with a bachelor's degree. I finished all of my ratings between private and multi-engine instructor before I went to college. At that time, those ratings cost me $10,000. So compare that to what today's is. When I went to college, it only took me 2.5 years to accomplish my bachelor's degree, because I tested out of 48 credits at $5 a credit, and I went full time. I didn't start my aviation right away. I was not 5 years old and looking up at the sky at airplanes, but when I was 21, I decided that that's what I wanted to do, because I had went to school for something else and decided this isn't a career for me. So as I moved through this, and I flew as a flight instructor, I flew charter, I flew corporate, and for a number of years I was a float plane instructor and did a lot of flying into Canada, doing a lot of training with that, so that's kind of my background. But when I was hired by Simmons, my first year pay was $11,000. So today we have now went to 20, still not enough, but that's where I started. I shared a studio apartment with 11 other pilots. Thank God we weren't all there at one time. We had no furniture in there and a black and white TV in the corner of the room. Okay? But what was my drive? The romance was, I never intended to be at Envoy today. I intended to be in the left seat of a 747. That's what I was telling myself. That was my drive then. Okay? But there isn't anybody in this room that doesn't understand that this industry cycles. Okay? In the early 90s, there was hiring, and then suddenly it stopped. In the late 90s, it began again. I was putting out my applications, I had everything going, just never got the phone call, never got the invite. It happens. You have to be prepared for that. Even today, when you come into this industry, you have to be prepared for that. And then, unfortunately, 9/11 happened. I had to make another decision in my life. I'm in my 40s now. Am I going to move on and continue to try, or do I make Envoy the best place I can possibly be? Now, mind you, in 1990, when I came off of probation, I entered into doing uni work besides flying, and I still do it today as my third 4-year term, elected as Vice President of Administration. I was elected in 2006. So I've had, I think, a huge privilege and a huge advantage to watch 31 carriers and watch each one of those cultures to see what they're looking for in pilots, their needs, when they're going to hire, when they're not going to hire. After 9/11, we lost some carriers, unfortunately, due to bankruptcies and just not being able to keep the doors open. And we saw many contracts take hits. And people took huge pay cuts. In some cases, 50% pay cuts or more. Benefits, defined benefit plans going away. So there's been a lot of change in this industry, but it's coming back now, and it is brighter. And as you heard Ken mention, the numbers are coming back, and the need for pilots is out there. But the big question is, and I've heard other people on other panels today talk about this, it's a pay shortage. And if you look at our website, it's a pay shortage, okay? It's not that we don't have pilots out there. It's a question of whether they'll come to work for $20,000 or $23,000 a year, when we know there's other jobs that pay more. Janelle did a great job of explaining some of the finance assistance that's out there, what it costs. If somebody stays on point, the way I understand it, Janelle, it's $131,000. Although I have had young pilots share with me the fact that it was $150,000 to $200,000. We can argue that all day long. Same thing with the amount of pilots that are needed that Ken said. But the bottom line is, if we want to make this attractive, the romance for the 5-year-olds and the kids that are always looking up at the skies, absolutely true. But if we want to get a better connection with these young folks that are going into school, wondering if they should be airline pilots, it's a pay thing. It really boils down to pay. And the other thing that we have to remember with that is that we hear some of our carriers out there say, well, gee, we just can't pay that. And you know, with the way the hiring is going on at the mainline carriers right now, you know, you're not going to be here that long. You know, okay, all right, that's great. But we know this industry can hiccup, and God help us if we run into another 9/11 situation. Okay, we're back to square one just about. But the thing is that for the regional pilots, and there are many regional pilots out there that are my age that have made the decision that, okay, I'm at that point. I'm going to remain a regional pilot. I will retire as a regional pilot. And for many of us in this room, we don't fly Shorts 360s anymore. And even the turboprop aircraft that our carriers do operate right now, and our Canadian brothers and sisters, 9 of them that we represent, carriers up in Canada, the turboprop drivers up there are making over $100,000 a year in the left seat. Okay, but even those aircraft are sophisticated enough that they have glass cockpits. The jets that we fly right now are 76, 90 seaters. We've got some 50 seaters, but we know what the decisions are that are being made and what's market driven out there. And so those airplanes, most of them are going to go away, but we are starting to get larger aircraft, and we see it every day. They're glass cockpits. They're multi-million-dollar airplanes. They fly 500-600 miles an hour, just like the big ones. There's a lot of responsibility out there. And it's important that I also heard some discussion today about hours required and where they're at. I can remember flying with people with 250, 300 hours, excellent skills on the flight deck, being able to operate that FMS and understand how much is in that glass cockpit and what they're looking for. But the flying skills are not there, and we owe it to the public that flies to make sure that we stay as safe as we possibly can. And ALPA's motto for 84 years has been schedule with safety. And that's what we're about. So we need to maintain that. At the same time, we need to realize these aircraft that we fly now are not toys. They're not puddle jumpers. I don't even consider myself a regional pilot anymore. I can take off from Chicago and end up in Santa Barbara. Is that regional? I don't think so. So with that said, and all of this taken into context, you know, one of the things that our pilots have definitely stressed on is not only the career projection standpoint, but they look at career progression. Okay, that career progression can be accomplished, but it's going to take groups of people to sit down and start to discuss how do we take the entry-level positions, the flight instructors, the people that we've reached out to, that in some cases, Envoy, my carrier, and some other carriers out there went ahead and done. They've offered some type of retention, $10,000 in the case of Envoy, to hold on to pilots. And then we move them through the process and hopefully they end up in the left seat of a 777 before the end of their career. And to the end of the finance thing, when the parents come in and visit with Janelle and other people at different flight schools, and the parents ask what $200,000 are going to get their child, who they want the best for, and then the reality comes in after all the review and everything has been done that you're going to start at $20,000, but you have $848 a month to pay your student loans. Something's not balancing, it's not jiving, or at least not in my math. So a lot of things to consider, but we've got people in the room here that obviously you wouldn't be here if you weren't interested. And you know, it's going to take time, but we have to show a career path and we have to show some pay. We got to help these people out. And that, I believe, will bring our younger generation back into the profession. And it's a great profession. I tell everybody, you know, the office that I have has the greatest view in the world. There is nothing that is a better view than outside the window, looking out that windscreen on that flight deck at 370. So a lot of things to consider. And you know, another thing that helps me a lot with this perspective, as part of my duties as Vice President of Administration, I'm also leading the professional development group. And within ALPA, that's our education committee that reaches out to the universities. Some of you are familiar with it. We've established ACE clubs at a number of different of the larger flight school universities. I'm also oversight with our membership committee within ALPA. So we take them from new hire to retirement. And then if there are people that come in as members in good standing of the association, they are eligible to run in leadership roles. So I also work closely with the leadership committee. And I see a lot of fine young individuals that come into our profession and want to do a great job. But I also hear their pain when they share with me just exactly what they can do with $20,000 a year and how mom and dad's basement is the only place they can afford. So anyway, with that, Paul, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
To wrap things up, it seems as though we've identified some of the challenges on return on investment, but we've heard some great proposed solutions in improving airport operations and flight training. We've heard about how we can impact the availability of financing and what methods and what actions we can take to improve the availability of money to pay for flight training and lower the cost of borrowing that money. We've also talked about how airlines are reaching out to students and how they're working together between mainline and regional partners. Alex mentioned that the market will help fix the problem with the compensation. I think we all agree that that's probably part of the solution to not only addressing the immediate need for pilots, but for the long term. And many airlines, including ExpressJet and JetBlue, have pathway programs and outreach to younger pilots. So I think that sums up a great panel with some excellent commentary. I'd like to thank the panelists, and we'll take a recess. We'll ask that you please return 5 minutes prior to 3:30 for our next panel. 3:45. Thank you. Thank you very much.